steam, electricity, computers, all these industrial revolutions, people thought that they're going to lose jobs. But what really happened was it created new jobs.
We are doing things like using facial recognition and AI technology in a classroom to see if the students are engaged or not. Right. And that is a useful input to the teacher and into the teacher training program, so that the quality of teaching to the students gets enhanced.
I feel AI has significant potential, bringing all the stakeholders together, and the risks that we talked about, there are ways and means of addressing them. So putting the correct structures in place and kind of making use of it will certainly benefit society at large.
AI for all, driving sustainable and equitable growth in government and social sectors. Hello, you're with Decision Points, and in the studio with us today are Vijay Gopalakrishnan, who is partner offering leader for AI, Gen AI, automation, BPM and strategy at Deloitte India. Also with us is Nishan Mendis, who is Technology and Transformation Leader at Deloitte in Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and also Zahra Cader, who is ESG, Government and Public Services Leader at Deloitte, Sri Lanka and the Maldives. I welcome you all to Echelon. Let's start with this question. We're talking about digital public infrastructure and digital public goods in the context of the topic, right? And my first question to you is, why are digital public infrastructure and public goods considered essential? But in talking about this, Vijay, I think we'd have to define what digital public infrastructure is and digital public goods are. What are these?
So digital public infrastructure is nothing but a digital version of a highway or a road or railway network, which comprises of digital systems which say governments or business or citizens can use to do digital payments and transactions to avail goods and services, just like in a road highway network or in a railway network.
So this is infrastructure provided for by the government, publicly funded, provided for by the government?
So the government supports it, but they work with private players to build it up.
Okay. Right.
This can then be used for various analytics use case, because analytics use case would need data and digital backbone. I mean, that's how it is.
What is a digital public good?
So it's a constituent of the digital public infrastructure. For example, right, in an Indian context, right? So you would have a national identity biometric based database called Aadhaar, right? Then you have the unified payment interface to make mobile based payments between people to people, people to merchant, or between person to bank. So each of these digital payments, digital ID database, there's something called DigiLocker, which a citizen can use to safely store digital financial assets. So these are essential constituents, digital public goods, and they make part of the digital public infrastructure.
Judging from what we read, Vijay, it looks like India has made giant strides in digital public infrastructure, particularly in the last, I think in the last 5 years, or since Aadhaar, the digital identity was introduced, right? Can you give us a little bit of background, because I think this is a regional case and maybe relevant to the conversation.
That's true. Yeah. So I'll speak from the context of being part of the journey, because I have been in the IT industry in India since 1999.
Sure.
In fact, I started with Infosys with Narayan Murthy at the helm and later Nandan at the helm. And then I've also been a citizen, right, availing a lot of these services, and also a business user availing these services. So speak from personal experience on both sides. So this all started with the IT services revolution, right? That ensured that the right people and skills are there. So for example, Nandan, right, who started and helped deploy the UIDI or Aadhaar project, he was the former Infosys CEO.
Right.
Once that happened, you need the necessary technology and network infrastructure, right? Which is when the telecom revolution with the likes of Airtel coming up, right? All this had government backing it.
Sure. And then you said UIDI, what does it stand for?
So this is the unified identity database based on biometrics.
Sure. This is what we call Aadhaar. basically.
Aadhaar, right? So this ensures that all sections of society, including people from the marginalized sections, right, who might not have any other form of ID documentation, especially people who are nomadic, right? They might not have a permanent home or other things. So this helps.
Right. I'll bring you in, Nishan. We've now in a region where, particularly in India, the pace of development with digital public infrastructure is phenomenal in the last 5 years or more. How is this context relevant to Sri Lanka? If Sri Lanka were looking at similar digital public infrastructure, what can we learn from the region and what do we need to be doing here?
Yeah, Shamendra. See, if you look at where Sri Lanka is at the moment, the current context and the challenges that we are, as a country we are grappling with. Revenue, public revenue, government revenue, it's clear that we need to increase our government revenue, right? So how the solution that we have opted to is basically to increase the tax rates, right?
Sure.
Which is, I think, is not practical and sustainable. If you look at, in the long term, that's not sustainable. Whereas, how digital ID can help us in this is basically, it's not to increase the tax rates, but what we need to do is basically broaden the tax base, right? So for you to do that, you need to identify who are the candidates who should actually pay taxes, right? So digital ID, definitely, which is a major component of DPI, will help us in doing that. I'll take an example. For example, say, Shamendra, you purchase a vehicle, right? So that will get recorded in the RMB database. You purchase land, right? That will get recorded in the land registry.
Sure.
If you go abroad for a vacation, that will get recorded in the immigration systems, right? But these are not interconnected, right? Of course, you will have your data, in each of these systems, but on siloed systems. What digital ID will do is basically, it's a unique digital ID that will actually interconnect all these, different systems. So the inland revenue will be in a position to actually trace all the transactions that you have done and also your income, right? Whatever that has come into your bank account, right? That will, it will be easy for the inland revenue to trace all that, right? So with that, it will be, the inland revenue will be able to actually increase the tax base, right? So the second point is actually on what Vijay said on UPI, right? It's digital payments, right? So when you do that, you will have a cashless kind of environment where everything goes through bank accounts, right? Through the normal banking channels, right? So when you do that, every transaction could get kind of traced, right? And that will help in identifying who should actually pay taxes. So that's on revenue generation. Then the other challenge that we face is actually public expenditure. How can we reduce the public expenditure, right? Especially the wasteful expenditure when it comes to welfare. So if I can just give you an example, in India case, right? The first year that they implemented Aadhaar, they could actually save $33 billion out of a total of $361 billion, right? It's about 10%. They could save on public welfare payments because
these were going to the wrong people, basically.
Exactly, and because you can then identify the legitimate people. It should go say if I'm a recipient of a welfare samurudhi or aswasuma, whatever that we call it. Say I die. Right now, how to track it, right? So digital ID, because it's also connected to your death certificate, right? So you will be able to identify that so and so has now passed away, and you don't need to now kind of transfer the welfare. So and there can be, these are some simple examples. So there can be a lot of things, and also improve the efficiency of as a country we are talking about increasing productivity, right? So these digital goods will actually help us in doing that. It's not only public sector, even in private sector, you can actually do that. Another example, using eKYC, right? You can say Aadhaar, right? So
KYC is know your customer.
Know your customer, right? So where it cost them about $5 before implementing Aadhaar, it came down to less than $1, right? So 1/5 of the cost, right? So this all will kind of reduce your cost of doing business, improve efficiency, right? And also transparency.
Sure.
Right?
Just to bring the context of the topic in here, we are discussing how AI, artificial intelligence, can be used to drive sustainable and equitable growth, right? And Vijay, I'll ask you, could you share successful examples where DPI and DPG have enabled AI applications to serve marginalized communities? Nishan started talking about it. I think you have first-hand experience in India, as you said.
Yeah. So one example, which is actually in the works, is the farmers, not the rich farmers, right? The maybe smaller scale farmers and who are not as rich and kind of from the marginalized sections of society, to get access to credit was always a difficulty because they didn't have the right documents or identification, related documents. So the Aadhaar biometric based ID helped a lot in that, right? Now, does it based on that, the government was able to give all of them the chance to create bank accounts and do financial transactions using the account. So that created some kind of financial transaction history for them. That is a useful input into a predictive AI model for credit risk, right? So that micro loans can be given to them. In the past, you didn't have an option to do it because there was no data about financial transactions related to them. So this is a live example. There are, this is one example. In the interest of time, we will discuss more.
Okay. Zahra, let me bring you in. What are the primary risks in AI adoption in government and social sectors? Sri Lanka has deep income inequality. How can we ensure that doing so doesn't result in exacerbating these inequalities in society? What should we watch out for? Nishan's already talked about the benefits on a very practical sense for both government revenue and government expenditure management and optimizing both these. What about in the application of AI? How do you make sure we don't leave people behind or make things worse?
Like my colleague said, there are many applications, right, where AI actually can bring about positive change, but what kind of determines is how you use it, right? Because especially marginalized communities, when you look at them, one of the key risks that we see from adoption of AI is the fact that privacy and ethical concerns.
Right.
Because people's data is getting aggregated in different places that you don't know.
Sure.
With telecom suppliers, maybe with banks, healthcare suppliers. Lots of people are aggregating the data. When using it, so you may not know how it is being used. And also the fact that the data in itself can have biases.
Sure.
That is an ethical consideration. If I may kind of just get into some of these things, when I say biases, if you look at, these are live examples from other countries where, when you look at predictive policing, right? In what has kind of shown is sometimes you tend to, because you're going by past data, you tend to kind of over police a certain community because of crime rates being high among them. So you're unfairly treating certain marginalized communities. Similarly, when it comes to hires, some models have shown, because especially hiring for technical roles, if you look at past 10 years data, you may be going on to hire more males because they were in the past in those roles. So it exacerbates, like you said, these disparities that exist. So what do you do about it, like you said, right? So increasingly, what is being looked at is when you're collecting data, so there needs to be regulation around collecting, using, retaining data, and increasingly citizens' consent to use these data, so that there is more regulation around how this data is used, as well as against biases. Increasingly, I like this. I think, Vijay, you were the one who mentioned this. Data is actually used in AI not to make decisions, but as a decision support system. That's where it should go, because there should be ethical considerations, human intervention, human in the loop, so to speak, so that intervention comes in and there is a lot more policing around the way you use the data and regulation around it.
I'm putting you on the spot here. If you look at Sri Lanka's social structures, right? Where do you think those ethical issues can crop up in the use of AI to analyze data? Where do you think those biases can exist? What parts of society?
So one of the key challenges is the lack of data, Shamindra. Because look, lots of the data that is available also could be from people who might not represent the entire community.
Sure. Right.
Even the data that is there is not digitized, so that the diversity of data is crucial in AI.
Sure.
That's where I think a lot of the people could get affected, because their concerns may not come to the forefront and that may not get addressed somewhat as well in this whole process. So data quality, diversity of data also is something that would kind of impact the people who may be marginalized.
Sure. Nishan, Vijay talked extensively already about the Indian experience with DPI and DPG. How do you think Sri Lanka should approach this? Should we adopt something very similar to what India has done? Should we look at a homegrown solution to DPI and DPG? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Shamendra, two aspects into this. One is clearly Sri Lanka can learn from India's DPI, DPG story, right? See, if you look at the two countries, right, there are differences, right? If you look at population, we are nowhere near, right? So the way that they have implemented, how they have approached might be a bit different to how we should approach as a country.
Sure.
But if you look at, culturally, there are a lot of similarity, right? Culturally, we are very similar. If you look at the challenges that we share are unique to this part of the world, right?
Zahra's talking about this data asymmetry. You have data on one section of the population and you don't have any on the other, similar to, I suppose.
Exactly. So there are differences, but there are similarities as well.
Right.
So what I feel is there's a lot that we can learn, and we don't need to actually reinvent the wheel, right? We can actually because India has evolved over a period of time, right? So they have made mistakes. So even if you look at technology, right, the open source digital platform that India has used, if you look at the policy and regulatory environment, they had to change, certain things to implement these, right? So these are things that we can actually learn as a country when we implement. As I said, India has made mistakes, right? They have corrected them. So I had an opportunity to talk to the chief architect of the other project, few months back. And so when we had this discussion, I was telling him, okay, what are the challenges that we are facing? Why can't we being able to, get this done off ground at the moment? So he was actually saying, Nishan, you're talking about these challenges. We face the same challenges in India. And this is how we actually kind of approached it. This is how we, found solutions to those. So we can actually learn from those. And the other thing is, because India has evolved now, we have the opportunity to leapfrog, right? So we don't need to go through the same path that India went, because now there are learnings. I will give you an example, Shamendra. Now, in the Aadhaar profile, originally, I think still it's the same, that you need to, when you share your profile, you need to share the entire profile, right? Your name, date of birth, contact details and all that. So when you share your Aadhaar profile, that's how it happens. But now India is looking at, okay, how can we share only part of the data, right? How can we redact some of the data? For example, say if you go to a place where you need to establish your age, right? You don't need to share your entire Aadhaar profile, right? You can actually even redact the date of the month and the date and only share the year, the year of birth. Right?
This is due to privacy concerns?
This is, yes. So the citizen has the option to do this.
Right.
So we don't need now. Aadhaar started not with this, right? Now they have evolved.
Right.
Now when we implement, we can actually make use of all these, right? So there's an opportunity for us to, definitely an opportunity to leapfrog. But having said that, I should say that, we already have certain things in place, Shamendra. So we don't need to start from scratch, right? Because we have our NIC database already. We have the passport databases. We have the driving license. So we have certain amount of data, right? Some of the data even we have the biometrics as well,
Sure.
right? So we don't need to start from scratch. We can actually make use of that, right? So I would say it's a hybrid. But we can definitely learn from the India's.
Vijay, let me bring you on the same thing. You've seen firsthand the rollout in India and perhaps also the missteps, right?
Yeah.
If you start putting things into buckets about what Sri Lanka can learn from India's missteps, or how to contextualize or how to make it relevant for Sri Lankan context, what would those areas be?
Yeah, so I would say, and drawing upon what Nishan said, right? So, for example, biometric data. And this is something to the advantage of Sri Lanka, which probably didn't exist in India.
Sure.
Your population is smaller, of course. Also, many more people have passports and biometrics passports, right? So probably you don't need to spend time and resources on creating a biometric unique identity database, because you can leverage what is already there,
in the system.
right? So that way, you cut short the go-to-market on AI use cases in the public space. That's one, right? And like I said, right, you don't need to build an end-to-end digital public infrastructure. A lot of it can be done using data like this in the interim, and that's what we did in India as well. It's like even in a private sector, right? You go to do something for the client and the management, they are not going to wait till the whole project ends. Right? You start in small bits and give some value. So this is the best way to do it, is what I would say.
Right. What are some of the key AI use cases that have been implemented globally and regionally with DPI and DPG generally?
I would maybe take one step back. While DPI and DPG is there are also various other data sources, right? So, for example, private sector companies have a lot of citizen data, like telecom operators. They have locational data, which is very useful, right? DPG and DPI are one source of data. So, as far as an AI model goes, you collect data from everywhere which is permissible, which increases the accuracy and efficiency of the use case.
Just to understand, it is into a government-controlled database that everything has to come to.
Yeah,
are these databases publicly accessible?
So, see, if you are doing an AI use case for a government entity, of course, the other data also needs to be brought into whatever common database you are giving access to that AI model, right? It's like any AI project, right? But having said that, right, using a combination of these databases like Aadhaar and all these telecom data, few examples in various, if I may say, social sector or government areas, education and skill development, right? In India, we are doing things like using facial recognition and AI technology in a classroom to see if the students are engaged or not. And that is a useful input to the teacher and into the teacher training program, so that the quality of teaching to the students gets enhanced, right? Another important area is planning and development of cities. Cities are the nerve center of development in any country. I live in Bangalore, in India. It has possibly the worst kind of traffic in the world today. Today, as we speak, the traffic signals in Bangalore are AI driven. So I'm sure you have been at traffic signals where you think this side of the road is all jam packed and that side is already, they are having it easy, but the signal is going green, right? But now with this AI model, you do it based on traffic patterns. So maybe you leave this side of the road to go faster and it's more efficient, right? The other areas are, I already mentioned about how you can get credit modeling to give micro loans to farmers, right? In the finance area, healthcare, during COVID, right? We all had an app on our phone where you had to enter your health status, right? And if you have tested positive, anyway, the government will update it on its own. Say you go to a supermarket, you have 7-8 people there. You go back to your homes, one of them gets tested positive. Locational analytics, all the other 7 get informed, say get tested, you are at risk, and the government tracks it, right? And even agriculture, if I would like to end with it, you have satellite images of crops and soil. You have historical data of what kind of soil structure helps better yield. So that can go in and tell the farmer that you have to do these soil restoration techniques to improve your yield, right? Big thing for a farmer. Lastly, land property rights, correct? Very important thing in our part of the world. You have to have so many documents. You have to compare all of that. Now with generative AI, which is, by the way, AI is not dead, but generative AI as a subcategory of AI is also growing a lot. One big use, as you might have heard, is scanning through a lot of documents and summarizing useful info in a very short time, right? That can be done to cut short this property title verification, right? These are actually being used. Some of them are in proof of concept stage, but in the last 3-4 months, be it in private sector or government, a lot of them are moving into production as well.
Right. Samendra, just to add one point to that. Now, when you talk about AI, it's all about data, right? And when you have large amounts of data, you need to have, tools, and AI using AI and, for data analytics and all that to actually analyze this data. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to take decisions if you don't have such, because you're talking about large amounts of data, and also to personalize your, offerings, especially in, it could be in public sector or even in private sector, to personalize the service that you provide. That's where AI really helps you. You analyze your data and you can actually personalize the service that you provide to a particular person.
Zahra, in the wider context, we're talking also about the sustainable development goals. And if you look at those objectives that, countries have set for themselves voluntarily, how might AI-driven initiatives help countries achieve these SDGs?
Like you said, Shamindra, so we've this SDGs is an agenda for 2030. Yes. Right? Not very far away.
Not very far away.
Look, we have 17 goals, 169 targets. Look, while there's a lot of work being done, unfortunately, we are not on target, to achieve them as yet. So lots of people feel technology has a role to play in this whole thing for us to move towards these targets. And AI-driven solutions are increasingly addressing these needs at a broader level. And when doing it, like my colleague said, the important thing is where society, government, private sector all come together and kind of make sure these targets are met. So when we talk about SDGs, while we have 17 goals, look, some of the key areas that there's a lot of progress in terms of AI contributing towards SDGs are in the space of health, education, climate. Those are some of the key areas and development sector kind of initiatives. My colleagues, I think, already alluded to what is being done on the health side. Now, if we look at it, Shaminda, some of the other developments are looking at early detection of diseases based on availability of vast amount of data. So you are able to kind of look at particularly cancer kind of diseases because of maybe medical imaging as well as past data algorithms that are put together. So they are able to detect them early, which actually helps the health system in terms of resources as well as the patient's experience, because you are probably being early detected. So healthcare wise, there's a lot of benefit as well. Also resource allocation when it comes, because we have limited resources, and when in health sector, look, if you can predict the inflow of patients, so timely care for patients, all these are things that can be done in terms of the health. I would also like to go a little bit further on the agri one that Vijay mentioned. Look, while agriculture helps kind of farmers in looking at the ways that it can be done, also one of the key things is precision. Look, where you are when you know what the soil requires, and if you know the weather patterns, instead of putting like a NPK, like a full formula of fertilizer, you can just use the required fertilizer for the required plants. Sure. So there again, resource maximization and using, and also in terms of food, pesticides pesticide use. All these things can also contribute towards SDGs at a broader level. And on the climate one, I'd just like to touch in terms of emissions. Look, especially when you look at Google kind of imaging, and when you look at sensors on ground and the data availability, you can predict emissions and air quality, which kind of helps governments take initiatives and policies in terms of how do you make sure that the quality of air is better, and bringing in maybe certain regulations to kind of regulate the bigger industries. Right. So all these are ways in which actually AI can contribute towards SDGs at a broader level.
Something I'm gathering from this conversation, Nishan, is the importance of having a digital ID for Sri Lanka. It seems to be the genesis for a lot of other initiatives where you can introduce AI in a way that sort of advances society, helps people access services, etc. Right? Now, let's look at a scenario, hopefully, where Sri Lanka does start having digital ID. And in such a scenario, who are the players that need to be around the table to help advance society, help leverage AI on the data that then we have to advance society? I mean, we're talking about government. Is government the only player at the table?
Definitely not, Shamendra. Government is a key player, right? Because if you look at, as I said, the policy and regulatory environment that should, prevail to have such a system. So there's a definite, government is a key stakeholder in this. And then to take, policy decisions, right? And, if you look at a key critical success factor for such an implementation is proper leadership, right? Because you need to take decisions, you need to take quick decisions. Some decisions, it might not be very kind of, attractive to certain individuals or parties. So you need to have that strong, leadership.
Sure.
So that has to be given by the government.
Is there going to have to be an AI regulator, a government unit on AI? How does it work in India? Vijay, I'll come back to you, Nishan.
Sure.
How does it work?
So it does help. For example, in India and even Sri Lanka, right? I think there is the national AI strategy being worked on, but you don't need to wait for that, right? So, just to also come into what Nishan said, right? Even in India, as I mentioned, government was a key element, and government will is important. There's no doubt. If that doesn't happen, nothing of this will, right? And when I say government, it is the ministers all the way up to the top. It is the bureaucrats or the officers, and also, all the supporting, if I may say, staff around that, but also private players. In what form can private players come? Like, for example, Nandan came in and he led that program based on his years of experience. It helped, right? But also all the other players who actually developed the software for this digital public infrastructure. It was companies like Gupshup, RS Software. These are private players, right? Who were enabled by the government, and they came in and developed parts of that.
Did they develop applications on top of the software, or did they develop core portions of the software?
Both.
Right.
So they have a role in terms of development, in leadership, in advice, and the government went and sought that and allowed them that flexibility to do it, right? That's why they succeeded. And the other important point, they continue to support this over years, irrespective of which government, because it needs continuity, just like any product. Somebody, if they come and stop it, the players would back off, right? So it's very important that way.
To you, Nishan, you're talking about the government as a central player, but who are these others who can potentially, in the Sri Lankan context, sit around the table?
So, as I said, private, players definitely has to get involved.
Sure.
And if you look at the ADA or the DPI and the DPGs, what government did was they did the foundational things. They put that foundation in place, and then they opened it up so that there were a lot of private sector players who made use of that, and then develop. So it's like an ecosystem where the government did the foundation, but then there were a lot of other even startups. They make use of the UPI, the ADA, everything else, and then developed different platforms. Even now, as we speak, they make use of those and they develop it, because the actual success of this is actually when you have all these other ecosystem players coming in and developing. It's not just to have the Aadhaar, the digitize your ID. If you just have it in a siloed system, there's no use, right? So you have to have other players coming in. And that's when you really, as a country, that you really reap the benefit.
Shamindra, if I may come in, just look, while we were talking about all the things we need to do, one of the other areas I think we need to kind of probably we didn't discuss is the digital divide. We also need to kind of see during these strategies, while we make sure government and others make kind of put the processes and areas in place, look, how do we make sure the communities, actually some of these innovations can come from ground up? So you need to kind of put in place systems to make sure that there is more access for digital infrastructure, skills at ground level. I understand in India there is a program that is being put for youth AI targeting children from ages 8 to 12, where AI is taken around the country to younger folk so that it's embedded. So some of the areas that we have to probably look at as we go forward is to see how do we enable society as large also to kind of be able to take up AI as an area of expertise, and also skills and jobs. Because as we take up AI, some of the routine jobs probably will go out. So how do we kind of reskill people to take up some of the other jobs in the market? So those are some of the other social considerations that we might have to also look into.
It sounds like, Nishan, the fear that AI might lead to reduction or losses of jobs in government, also in the private sector. How real is it? How do you sort of begin to address concerns like that? What you don't want is a pushback immediately saying, this will lead to job losses.
So this is actually a concern, Shamindra. But let me put it this way. See, over the years, humans have been working like machines, right? So we had the time to actually do what is really required. We have been doing the routine stuff, right? If you look at our daily routine, right, maybe 60%, 70% of our time we do routine stuff, right? So what AI has done is it has taken that part of the work, right, and allowed us more time to actually do the creative decision making kind of stuff that the humans actually have to do, right? So if you look at the past industrial revolutions. So in each of those, people thought that they are going to lose jobs, right? Steam, electricity, computers, all these industrial revolutions, people thought that they are going to lose jobs. But what really happened was it created new jobs. It replaced existing jobs, but it actually created new jobs, right? So that's what will really kind of happen. It will give us time to do creative things, and at the same time it will create new jobs. And as Zahra mentioned, what is important is to actually look at reskilling and upskilling our employees, right? So, and the workforce and the next generation of a workforce that we have. So there's a lot of reskilling, and because there will be jobs will get replaced. The current routine jobs will get replaced, but at the same time there will be new jobs that's going to come out. And what is needed is actually to kind of reskill and upskill the next generation of workforce.
What's India's experience been on this front, Vijay? India is a large place, lots of poor people, right? Job loss can be devastating. Two parts to this question. How do you allay fears about the impact of digitization and use of AI on ordinary people? And how do you get about reskilling people at scale?
I'll answer that based on actual experience, right? Coming back to the fear of job loss.
Sure.
It's in the same India 3-4 decades back that people were going out on strike saying computers are coming into India, they will take away our jobs.
Sure.
And look at what has happened, right? IT has changed the landscape of India. I don't see anybody losing jobs. In fact, more people have jobs now.
Right.
Correct?
Do you know off the top of your head what India's IT exports are like in a year?
I wouldn't know the exact number.
It's about $250 billion.
Yeah. Just for reference, Sri Lanka's economy is some $70 billion. Dollars.
So, and it's not just about the growth in IT. Even in a city like Bangalore, there are people working in IT and making the money, but everything which comes around it, due to the purchase power they have, the hotel industry, the retail space just opened up, right? It's because of technology and IT that you're able to have an application like Uber or Ola, which means more jobs there. So jobs have only increased, right? So I think a lot of it is to do with messaging, both in terms of, public ads, or like in our case, the Prime Minister himself goes and addresses the country, and he usually speaks of such topics, and
right.
I mean, he can do, it's more about messaging and alluding to the fact that such fears were unfairly there just few decades back in our own country, and look at what has happened. And that's what will happen, right? I am with Nishan that jobs are not going to go away. They are only going to increase. Number one. There was a second part to your question other than that.
How do you reskill or retool people to deal with this new reality at scale? It has to be done for people who are already in the workforce.
Exactly. So I think first of all, even if in the worst case you say, for example, all taxi drivers' jobs are going to go away because of, say, driverless cars. Yeah. Just hypothetical. So first of all, that's not going to happen, right? To train driverless cars to drive in Indian situations will take years, yes. Right? So it's not like going to happen tomorrow. Firstly, even if in the worst case it happens, there is a government there. They are not going to let people to lose their livelihood because it has an impact, right? What good is AI if there is a large segment of society losing their jobs? It will lead to other problems. So it will be done in a phased manner, right? And that time can be used, right? Including people in academia and universities to train more youth, right? Academia has a role. The players other than government and public sector is academia. They played a role in all the digital revolution in India and globally. They can help a lot in, reskilling people, and of course the private sector itself, right? So more of doing it in a phased manner, and academia and private sector also coming in to help in the reskilling. Right?
Do you think such inequalities can be exacerbated, particularly at the lower end of the income pyramid, right? Because the ability for somebody who's already well off to quickly adapt to a reality, to acquire the skills, may be greater than somebody at the other end of the pyramid. Any thoughts from?
So maybe I'll take it, because it's the same situation at a much bigger scale in India. Right? I'll give you a personal example. When I was growing up in India, right, the poverty was visible. Now it is not, because overall the society has grown up, right? Sure. Even if I sit in a taxi, the literacy levels and education level have gone much higher compared to when I was a child. I would by default expect the person wouldn't know English, or at least will not be able to read in English. Today, almost every taxi driver person on the street at least is able to read and send few messages. So things have improved. So learnability has increased, right? The other thing which is also happening is that the government in India is coming with mechanisms where even the people in the remotest area, a child with no access to all the required resources, GenAI comes handy. There are chatbots launched on two counts. One is you want to know about the skills you need to develop and the career opportunities. You ask a GenAI application a prompt. It scans through and gives them in the language they understand, in a simple way, what are the things they need to do to get to that career, right? Secondly, there is a target of the government in India to get to English fluency to the largest amount of employable population by 2030. Again, a similar GenAI application, which at the snap of fingers gives them access to those resources to train themselves on that. So a mix of such mechanisms, right, by the government, by public sector and academia will do it, along with the fact that already, without us realizing, the overall society has come to a level of at least being able to understand and get access to this information, right? The last thing I would end on this point, that's why this thing of encouraging the telecom revolution, right? frankly, with whatever was done by Reliance with Jio, which made telecom services, including data on smartphones, easily accessible to the wider, that helped a lot. That helped in digital payments, subsidies, that helped them get easy access to such things. And you now have language models in GenAI which talk in any Indian language, right? So even if someone doesn't know English, that's no longer a restriction, right? So I think it's much more easier than what we think. Things have really moved on much faster in a positive way.
And Nishan, at the beginning of this conversation, you sort of linked the benefits of on society of adoption of a digital identity and potentially extending that to AI, to how it can impact the government's revenue management and expenditure management, right? And I will ask you to be very practical about it, right? Assuming we can get this digital identity sorted soon, because I think that there seems to be a determination to get this done fast now versus in the past, right? Assuming we can get this done soon, what are the low-hanging fruits for others in society? I'm not talking about government and revenue management and expenditure management. What about the private sector companies? What about those people in various strata, various places in Sri Lanka? What are the likely low-hanging fruits of getting this done?
So again, if you look at the India examples, what Vijay spoke of, right? When it comes to increasing efficiency, the examples that I told you about, right? The KYC, right? So cost of doing business, reducing the cost of doing business using different digital public goods, access to different services, right? Again, although some can be public services, it actually benefits the citizens, right? Reducing the corruption, right? In public sector, right? So now one of the great difficulties that the citizens face is actually to get something done in a public department, right? You need to know so and so, or you need to pay something to get that done, right? So this was actually one of the reasons. Even we look at brain drain and all that. Some say okay, it's obviously for greener pastures and all that, but then some were really kind of frustrated about the system, right? So the fact that you can reduce that amount of correction, because you are eliminating, because you're not meeting face to face your end client, right? So everything happens digitally, right? So when that happens, you eliminate all that corruption, right? So there are a lot of such kind of examples that you can look at, because as I said before, this is the ADA or the DPI is just the foundation. But then there are so many other players who will come in and then do certain, different applications, different tools that will get developed on top of that. Vijay spoke of the digital, education, the online education. So India has done something called, Bhashini. Yeah. Right. So they have, you can, on a click of button, you can actually, Vijay might be able to explain, but I think 16 or 17 languages they have now done, right? So you can translate, right? Yeah. So there are different applications that you can build on top of this base platform, Shamendra, which will benefit the entire society.
So maybe few quick points, right? Related to things that Nishan and Zahra also spoke. First thing to your question as to how do the marginalized sections of society benefit from these things, right? So now you have created a unique biometric ID for every citizen. Like he said, it makes it much more difficult now for someone to evade paying tax.
Sure.
Because they have your unique biometric ID linked to everything. Somewhere, right, you will get caught. So that is more...
What's the experience in India? Has it led to greater income tax compliance or tax compliance in general?
See, income tax compliance has increased anyways. This is one component. Right. Of course, there's also other aspects of how you put it out there and follow up. It's usually, technology is just an enabler, right? But I'm just talking about the fact that now, given digital payments, which can be logged, and the fact that it is uniquely linked to you. Say, you're trying to evade tax by paying cash, as he said, at a car dealer. But still, they mandatorily require your other data. So it will be logged, right? So this is more revenue into the coffers of the government. Number one. Number two, like he said, now cost and time in doing any verification has gone much less. So that's also cost saving, extra money coming. It means the government has more money to pay out as subsidies and to invest in projects for the marginalized society. And what is most important, now there is no issue with if I'm making a subsidy payment, is it going to the wrong person? Because you are paying it to a biometric Aadhaar linked bank account of the end beneficiary, right? So that way you have more money to give to the marginalized society people and ensure that it reaches him or her, right? That is number one. Number two, how are private players and public sector using the digital public infrastructure to create more innovative solutions, right? See, it's like initially, what did I say? Digital public infrastructure is a digital version of a road highway network or a railway network. The government would put out a railway network. What you do with it as a logistics player or other thing is for you to do. So one example is, you might have heard it, there is a company called Bharat Pay in India. So the government, the National Payment Corporation of India, along with private players, they created a unified payment interface, right, which allows interoperability, right? Any mobile app, you have Google Pay, Paytm, you can make payments person to merchant, right? So the interoperability framework is built, right? Now, what did Bharat Pay do? They said, say you go to a store in your community to buy something. Instead of having QR codes for each application, one single QR code, right? So that was a business they came up with. On the back of that, they started a business of giving loans to the Kirana. So they built a business model, but look at how easy it has become to me. Frankly, nowadays, I don't even carry cash because I have one QR code irrespective of whatever payment app I have. I can pay. The store owner or business owner is also happy. I am also happy. Similarly, on the public sector side, right? Once this digital public infrastructure was made, now in India, you have something called, open network for digital commerce. So however small a vendor or store you are, you can leverage this to go digital, right? So again, look at it, right? Like he said, you use the infrastructure to have public sector and private players build new solution. Lastly, on the important aspect of privacy and ethics, right? We need to remember AI and Gen AI is a technology which is being employed not just for public sector, for private sectors, where also all these are important, right? So there are already techniques well established to ensure that. One important aspect is, how do you train these models? If you train them on the right data, right, and you put the guardrails, these things can be taken care of. Bias, for example, if you have trained them on the right data, bias will not happen, right? So these are few points I wanted to leave with you.
Shamendra, on the UPI, one example that I can think of is I was there in India 2 months back. So when I was traveling, actually I could see, vendors or sellers, king coconut. Some were selling king coconuts. They had the QR code with them. So you actually pay, using your UPI, mode, right? So and Zahra and I, both of us were there. We, went somewhere and then we thought of having some chai tea, right?
Like a petti kade
kind of,
Yes.
So they had this QR code and we were actually surprised. That's the first time that we saw. We were actually surprised. And it's not, government has not forced them to do this, Shamendra, right? But they have, look at the economic benefit of this, right? So it has gone to the grassroots level.
The efficiency
right? It all gets banked, right? Everything gets channeled through, banking channels, right? So look at the economic benefit that a country derives out of it.
So not just that, right? Earlier, these vendors would, like, they are in an open stall, they have to keep that cash. Half the time they're worried about somebody just sneaks in and steals it. Plus they have to spend time to go and put this in a bank. Now they don't have to worry about all this. See, there were few social situations also which happened, which caused them to adopt this faster. First, there was the demonetization. Though the trigger was something else, a lot of them went into this mobile payments mode at that time, right up to the grassroots. Then COVID, that help speed up adoption of this much more. So it's actually, I would say, adversity, but people used it in a positive way.
And now there's a joke that, even beggars will now carry, QR codes.
Apparently that is the case in China, right? Exactly. Virtually anybody, even somebody begging on the street has a QR code.
Exactly.
I will ask each of you to take a minute if there's anything you want to add to round off this conversation. Can I start with you? Anything you want to add, Zahra?
So, like I said, it's about bringing all the stakeholders together.
Right.
I feel AI has significant potential, bringing all the stakeholders together, and the risks that we talked about, there are ways and means of addressing them. So, putting the correct structures in place and kind of making use of it will certainly benefit society at large. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and I agree to what Zahra said. It's all coming together. It's a collaborative effort. Government, academia, private sector, everybody has to come together. And also, one key point is actually reskilling or skilling the workforce, because that is key. Because no matter what digitization that happens, people should know how to kind of use it, right? So academia has a greater role to play in this. You need to upskill and reskill our workforce.
The only thing I would like to end, Shamindra, is in South Asia, we have possibly been the place where the maximum number of AI use cases have been delivered for people locally and for people abroad. This is the place with the potential to do most in AI. I think, and Sri Lanka is already on that path. If India with its large population and challenges can do it, and do it successfully and continue to do it, I'm sure Sri Lanka, given its success of doing well on social and economic parameters, having high literacy, already started on this path. I'm sure they will do well. It's just about, like Zahra said, all the players coming together and just moving ahead with it. It will go really well.
All right, that's a perfect note to end this discussion on. Vijay and Nishan, Zahra, it's wonderful to have hosted you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shamindra.
Thank you for having us.